All right. And then, I think if you want to begin, Diana, I think if you want to start, I think last time you were chair for this meeting. So if we want to get started with that. And begin.
Yes, all right, we'll call to order the Joint Review Board for Tuesday, August 18th, 2020. We'll take roll call. Bradley Klingsborn.
Here.
Peter Ross. I see him. He's here. Okay, he's waving. Bob Matthews.
Here. I'm sorry, I was on mute. I'm here. Yep.
Thank you. Thank you. Do we have Brent Waker? I don't see him online right now. And then Diana Ellenbecker from the City of Green Bay. I will entertain a motion to approve the agenda. Any discussion?
If there's no discussion, I'll move. Okay.
Okay, we have a motion by Bradley, second by Bob. All in favor, say aye.
Aye. Aye. Aye.
That passes. We'll take a motion to approval of the minutes.
Actually had
Any discussion?
one amendment,
Okay.
and that's on the summary, one of the votes, it says the yes vote came from Chad Weininger. I just wanted to correct that. On the summary minutes under regular business.
Okay, we will look into that, correct. Because his name was in there at the beginning, they had to manually go through each one and take it out and replace yours. So apologize for that. We will get that cleaned up.
Okay. With that approval, I would move to approve the minutes.
Okay.
Second.
We have a motion by Bradley, second by Bob. All in favor?
Aye.
That passes. We'll move right on to regular business. Consideration with possible action to adopt an allocation amendment resolution and amend the project plan for Tibs 7, Ashland Avenue and Lombardi Avenue corridors. Over to the director.
All right, thank you very much. I'm going to go ahead and see if I can't share these slides here. So let's see if this works. No, that's not what I want. All right, can you see a PowerPoint slideshow?
Yes.
Yes, okay, and does it have notes on it or is it just the slides?
Just the slide.
Just the slides. Great. So what I will do is just, as we get into it, today on the agenda, a number of things looking at TID 7, 8, 9, 12, 14, and 17. A lot of this is going to be a repeat of what we did last year. We have updated some numbers based on current projections. DOR and state statute requires us to do some of these actions in the actual year that they're happening. I think it was important that we did do them last year because I think it was important to put together how these all fit in terms of closing TIDs and opening up new TIDs. So it was really important to get them all on the table. Now we're actually coming up on timelines for having to do some of these actions for allocations, the affordable housing extensions, and terminations. So we'll need to go through and really kind of reapprove what we've talked about as we went through the annual meeting. Our 2019 final numbers are in, so we updated some of the projections with those and just made some small tweaks to see where we're at based on our estimates last year moving forward. So with that, these again are where we're at. As we go through and just a high level of some proposed allocations, and we can come back to the summary slide. Really the allocations are to help close primarily TID 9 and then TID 17. And so again, just kind of to show like the comprehensive package of how these are all together. We needed about $2.7 million to close down TID 9. So here are the limits that have been proposed through the allocation amendments, and then basically what we feel in terms of the actual cash that's needed from each. Again, the final accounting, these numbers will adjust a little bit. That's why we did put a little higher limit, but this is where we're projecting. And then for TID 17, we'll need about $60,000. So I wanted to go through and kind of take these one by one. All of these have resolutions that will go before you today, with recommendations then to go to our redevelopment authority, which is having a public hearing on this a week from today, next Tuesday the 25th. And then those resolutions, if recommended for approval, will go to the Green Bay City Council on the 15th of September for approval there. And then the Joint Review Board will meet after that, and we can talk about some calendar dates in the days after that, sometime between the 15th and the end of September. So agenda item 1 is the consideration of possible action for an allocation amendment and amending the project plan for TID 7, which is Ashland Avenue and Lombardi corridors. Again, this is the area now referred to as the Legends District, recreated TID 23, which overlaps this to facilitate the development of the Legacy Hotel and some future projects more towards the stadium, Expo Hall, and Rush Center. This TID was really created to finance the development of the Tundra Lodge and some adjacent properties with that. However, we are done with the most part for developer incentives. There's one small project outstanding for Shore West, which we'll talk about closing out. And so that we would still like to move forward with the termination. And that is that termination, this will be the last year that we've collected taxes. And so 2019 taxes, which have been payable in 2020, we'll be using those to basically close out this TID. And then the next item talks about an affordable housing allocation amendment. But so 2019, these are the numbers that match up with our annual review: starting balance of 712, ending balance of just under 1.3. We have talked about finalizing some public expenses in that area. One of the things that has been identified in the project plan is some improvements when it comes to pedestrian accommodations in that area. If you've ever been out before or after a game, and that's football, basketball, hockey, it can be difficult to get around in that area. So we have allocated funds. We thought we maybe got to it last year, but we're not going to get to it until this year, to put in sidewalks, lighting, in some areas. Because we're doing that, the Wisconsin Public Service and AT&T have offered to work with us to bury the utilities also in that area, as long as we are digging up the ground. So we anticipate with our revenues to use those funds to complete those public projects that were identified in the plan, to encumber funds to pay out one outstanding development agreement, which is for the Shore West property, to encumber some funds to pay out the rest of the outstanding debt service that exists there, and then take $800,000 and allocate it towards TID 9 to help close that TID out, basically to break even. And then we'll talk about on the next piece, all expenses will be closed out in 2020. So that way all of the increment that will be billed for tax year 2020 collected in 2021, we're proposing that gets allocated towards affordable housing. And this TID will terminate in April of 2021. So we're taking the 2020 taxes that will be collected and using that for affordable housing 2021, which we'll talk about on the next item. And so with that, we're recommending doing this allocation amendment as part of this agenda item 1. So this allocation item, we talked about an allocation, the resolution is attached, and we're looking for an allocation not to exceed $1 million. Just based on the estimates we have so far, we figure that it'll probably come out to about $800,000. But again, the final accounting will adjust. And so that's where we're asking for up to $1 million in this allocation resolution.
Any discussion? Otherwise, I would entertain a motion.
Yes, I'd like to ask a couple questions. Mm-hmm. Specifically, we're considering the allocation amendments, and it would be an allocation to TID 9, correct?
Correct.
And then TID 9 is asking for an amendment to their plan to spend $2.5 million, which is the reason for the allocation. So I'm just wondering if we could table any of these until we've considered the TID 9? Because if we're not going to amend the costs, if we're not going to amend the plan on TID 9, then these allocations aren't necessary.
Correct. So if you want to hold this, and we can go right to TID 9 to talk about that, and that will maybe kind of set the stage for the rest of these. I think that would be appropriate if you want to make a motion just to table this for the moment and take up, I believe it would be item number 7.
7. Yep.
I motion to table and consider item 7.
I'll second.
Take it.
And we have a motion on the table from Bradley, second by Peter, to table this item and move on to item number 7. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, that's it. That's approved. That's it.
All right. So number 7, consideration of possible action to adopt a resolution amending the project plan for TID 9, State Highway 5457 Business Park. TID 9 is one we spent quite some time talking about. It's been referred to as the University Heights Business Park. And it's one that was created with really good intentions, but in terms of timing, probably was not so great with the economy and growth, and things really slowed down in terms of how we anticipated this developing. Most of the area to the south of Algoma Road was anticipated to develop industrial, and then towards the north, some commercial, primarily big box in this area. One of the things that we are looking for in consideration of amending the project plan is to make this TID actually eligible for an allocation. Based on when this TID was created and TID law at the time, this type of TID, which is an industrial TID, is not eligible for to be a recipient TID for allocations. Because of, again, where it was created at that time, it's not eligible to receive any funds from other tax increment districts unless it contains a number of things. In one case, it could be declared distressed. It's close to this. Unfortunately, the issue we have with this, it's not that the property values have declined, it's that we encumbered a lot of debt service without having the growth to support it. So distressed TIDs are really for those that have properties taken, offline or go tax exempt or have some sort of blight go through. So it does not qualify to be a distressed TID. But it is also eligible to be a recipient TID if it does contain cost or project cost related to either A, affordable housing, or B, environmental remediation. And so what we are looking to do is, based on some things that we have found in the last year, again, there's still a timeline on this for closing out this TID. Talked about projects kind of being dead in the water. There has been a little bit of effort from a developer to look at a housing project out in this area. So to amend the project to talk about potentially some affordable housing options, primarily in the area around Algoma Road and Niagara Trail. That is a potential project. And then also just as far as development of the further land, to have the environmental remediation as a possibility, just based over from old farming agricultural practices. That is also a potential cause for expending funds. I can say that we haven't identified any specific projects on which to expend these funds. Really, our primary interest is to include these in the project plan to make this eligible for an allocation from the other tax increment districts. If we do not amend this project plan to allow for the allocations, we will not be allowed to allocate from TIDs 8, 9, and 12. And so with that, we would have to look for alternative uses, either projects within those particular TIDs, or if we shut it down, there would be, I would say, if there's not project expenses, then the proceeds would be divided among the taxing jurisdictions. With that, it would put the city in a pinch in terms of where those funds would be needed to come from to pay for that debt service. That would be something that this TID, Director Allen, correct me, I think there's about 6 more years left on this. would have to come back to the city to basically fill the gap in terms of plugging that hole. And so we did check with the Department of Revenue in terms of how we could make this TID eligible and asking if we did amend the project plan, if that would qualify for it. And we do have confirmation that it would. And so that is why we are asking for that addition and amendment on the project plan here today. But as Mr. Klingsborn had said, I think it's appropriate to take this up first, because if this is not amended, I think the other points do become moot.
Is the $2.5 million, did you arrive at that because that's the projected excess that would be in the other soon-to-be terminated TIDs? Or do you have an idea for what to do with the $2.5 million?
So, yeah, so I think the numbers were calculated both on, one, based on some excess that was available, but also just running some high-level numbers about a potential housing project development out there, and what potentially that would assess out at, and what potentially the incentive needed would be to facilitate that development. The environmental costs were based on, looking at, we've done a lot of environmental remediation throughout the city, and just kind of a worst case scenario if a number of properties had to be cleaned up, what those potentially could be. I think some of those, we've had some properties, not only agricultural, but the service station has been abandoned for, some time, and just wanted to be prepared in case those were not maintained to clean that up. So I think that's where those numbers came from in terms of where that those monies could potentially be expended.
What's your overall exposure, Kevin, on TID 9? If you did nothing and you just let it play out, what is the projection on TID 9?
The projection on TID 9, and this would be as proposed with that allocation amendment, would leave us, we basically need about $2.7 million. That's what's proposed in terms of, I think as we talked about last year, the income, the increment is not nearly enough to pay for the debt service. And so annually we're getting about $190,000 in income, our debt service expenses, and you add our administrative expenses, which we've tried to cut back because there's not a lot of staff activity. It's really the DOR fees and some basic legal fees. We're, like I said, we're going into the red every year on this and continuing to eat up additional debt. So our exposure for the city is about $2.7 million. And yeah, Director Ellenbecker, if you want to discuss that.
Yeah, no, I was just going to chime in exactly at the end of 2019, as we reported, we were at $1.5 million negative, and with debt service remaining to the end of the TID, we still have $1.4 million outstanding in debt service. So between those offset by a very little increment, that is roughly where the $2.7 million came from. Again, at this point, we're already 1.5 in the hole and still have debt service to pay.
So you're essentially amending the plan and you're saying, hey, we're going to invest this money, but you're really not going to invest it unless the project comes through. But the project, if it comes through, would essentially cover what you have to invest, but it gives you a tool to get funds in to cover your gap. Is that the right way to think about it?
So I will say this is a last-ditch effort to potentially get a project off the ground that could get this TID right side up. I can't guarantee that project would move forward, but right now, we don't have any really tools at our disposal because of the shape that this is in. And so yes, that's why it's being proposed. There's still a termination resolution on here, I think, just to give us some options in terms of moving forward with it if it does not pan out. But yes, that is correct in terms of, all right, can we have some at least funds available to do this particular project, especially the housing component, because the housing was not identified in the original project plan.
So if the housing project doesn't come through, does that exclude your ability to transfer funds over to this TID, or do you, I'm assuming you have to spend that money, but you're only going to spend it, and that increment would offset the investment you made. So those two wash out. So if it doesn't come to pass, you still can't use it, or because you amended it to say that you could, now all of a sudden you can still transfer that money over? Does that make sense?
Yes, it's the latter. If it's in the project plan, it can be a recipient. It does not have to actually be expended on those particular project costs. It just needs to be a part of the project plan.
So in the really, if we supported this, what is the likelihood that it would really happen? I mean, is it 50-50? Is it an 80-20? Is it a 20-80? Realistically, I mean, I just want to make sure that
I would say it's a 20-80. I mean, there's infrastructure issues out there, and I'll be upfront. I mean, this is
a Hail Mary.
That would be an accurate statement. I think, one of the things that when we've discussed this and as we talked about in the annual report, I think for the most part, our tax increment districts are in fairly good shape, and we've tried to be, conservative in the way we approach financing and doing new ones. This is one that just, it's been a bear and has not shown any signs, in the 5 years that I've been here of, getting any better. There's been fits and starts with different projects, and I'll say, a Hail Mary is the appropriate term to use in terms of, just trying to see if there's anything else that we can do, to at least at the end of the day, best case, make this tax increment district, come back up to balance at zero, or at minimum, at least reduce some of the deficit that it's going into. Again, I think, Director Ellenbecker can probably attest in terms of, even Military Avenue, which was distressed at one time, is, seeing the light at the end of the tunnel and crawling out and generating more increment that, I think starting next year, it's going to be back in the black. But this one is just, it hasn't turned, and it doesn't show any signs of doing so. It's a tough one. I understand. I think that.
I'll be back from my district.
Yeah.
This is in District 1, and I know in RDA, I'm not sure how long ago, I lose track of time, but do you remember that the people that had sold the land to the city, they were highly concerned, right? I'm trying to remember what some of those concerns were, but was a road put in, or could you review a little bit of their concerns?
Sure. It was really having to do with infrastructure. So this was a complex agreement that when this tax increment district was created, this was also done, I believe, parallel with a boundary agreement with the town of Scott. And in there were some discussions about infrastructure, roads, water, sewer out in this area, and things that would be done by certain parties at certain times. Some of those dates and deadlines were missed. And one of the challenges, I don't know if like chicken and the egg is the right analogy here, but in order to, I think there's some hesitation to do a build it and they will come, just given the economy at the time, that you could invest a lot of infrastructure and that, you would all see the development follow. And I think what happened is, we, the city, started to invest a lot in infrastructure, and I think Director Ellenbecker might be able to pull us some particulars, but I think some of this bonding was originally for some of that infrastructure, primarily roads and streets. And we did it, and the development didn't come. And so I think the city pulled back a little bit saying, look, do we want to continue to spend more if this development is not coming and go further into the hole? And I think we've always said, look, if there is actually a project in the queue and we've gotten, down the aisle, maybe close to the altar a few times, but that project has never pushed forward that could provide the increment to actually then subsidize the rest of the infrastructure costs that are needed. And so I think just we've tried, at least from an administrative perspective, not to put this any further in the hole that it needs to be. And especially since it's getting towards the latter age of the tax increment district, there's just not enough time to start to crawl back out of it. If this were a new district and you had 15, 20 years to pay it back, maybe we think differently. But we're coming in on the home stretch of this one with only a few years left to catch up to be able to pay it back. So I think with that, there were some discussions with the developer about, if we do, when we do, and then I'm closing this one down, if there is a project, that there could be a commitment from the city really to kind of look fresh at this area and, create a new tax increment district based on a project, which we're, really, yep, what we're really trying to do now is that, look, we tie these districts to certain projects because then we know that there's revenue starting to come forward. And I think we've made that commitment. I think we made it at RDA. I think we made it at council. I can't speak for the JRB here in terms of like actually approving it. But I think the same thing with TID 12 and the far east side of the city there. We've talked about expanding that business park, but we're not going to do it till we actually have, a project in the queue that can help generate some increment to pay for it. So that's the case here, and would still propose the same thing.
Okay, I just want to make sure that even if it closes, that at some point in the future, we still might be willing to look at having it sit out there.
Yeah,
right?
Absolutely. Mm-hmm. Yep.
Okay, that's all I have. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So, and this goes out till how long, Kevin? This goes out till 2026,
October of 26 is term date.
Yep.
okay.
Kevin, you had a 20% chance at a project, 80% maybe it won't work. It's not real good odds, but it's a housing project, is my understanding. Can you describe what that might look like out there?
Sure. So, we've had 1-2 developers who have been interested in I'll call it, affordable housing project. Just kind of, I'll call it, kind of typical suburban multifamily. There's a demand for housing, obviously, throughout the city. But there's been interest, especially out in that area, both tied into GB, and also, just the area of the city that has been growing and has some employment opportunities. It's an attractive area, and there's some decent-sized parcels in which to get a complex, in which you can, scale it and get 100, 200 plus units to make it worth the while to do that development.
So would this be low-income housing then?
No, I think in terms of the affordable housing, I think what we looked at is this wouldn't necessarily be a tax credit housing project, but affordable in terms of gearing towards individuals would not have to spend more than 30% of their income on housing. So the developer did not talk about a subsidized housing project in terms of using tax credits. But really geared towards just using the market, but providing a product that would allow individuals to, not spend more than 30% of their income on housing.
So I guess, the question that I have ultimately, and I know you and I've had this conversation in the past, that we both agree that in properties that are developed for housing should be multi-income capable. Mm-hmm. Properties, so that there's a stratification of income levels at the property. Is that what you had planned for this one as well, or not?
Yeah, I think this particular project had looked at that, but in talking with the other landowners out there, there's only a handful. I think we had definitely talked and supported shifting away from the original plan that talked a lot about commercial and really was targeted for big box commercial. And shifting that to different types of housing and residential products. I think there's a way to get both renter and owner occupied housing out in that area, and also looking at a variety of incomes. In terms of getting that from one specific developer, that's really tough, just because developers have like a product that is their bread and butter, and a lot of times it doesn't include striation across, incomes in one project. But with that, then that's why you work to not give one developer a monopoly on all the land out there, so that you can bring in some, differences in terms of housing products. So with that, I think, there's been no formal request in terms of, changing it to the entitlement, to change from that commercial to residential. But we have had those discussions about having additional residential out there to kind of fit the demand that has been in the city.
So I guess my question is, Kevin, are there other TIDs sitting out there that will have reserves that are beyond the ones that you're looking to fund? So that if you leave it open, you can continue down the path, you just leave this open, work with other developers, put together an alternative plan for how to pay for it if they don't come to pass, or at a future time, go back and pull from another TID to try to cover that. And again, I know you're stuck because if you don't do this amendment, you can't use those funds. But I mean, is there a time where you have to make this decision? I mean, are you running out of time to say, I've got to make this amendment within the next year, 2 years, 4 years before I walk past that opportunity to get other funding? So do you have to make that decision today? Or it's just, hey, I know these are closing, I know I can get funds from here, I can get this covered. I understand what you're trying, I mean, I truly appreciate what you're trying to do, but is there something else out there? Because I feel like we're working around the system, to be honest with you, to make it work. And again, we're here to work together, but this one feels so far out of bounds personally that I'm having a difficult time with it.
No, and look, I mean, I think that's, wanting to be kind of upfront about the purposes and realistic chances of projects happening. I think for us in discussions, with the Department of Revenue, and I think Director Ellen Becker can attest, right? I mean, the legislature has made changes over time, and every year, you kind of have to keep track, like, okay, when was this TID created, and what were the rules in place at the time the TID was created? And, we've done allocations before, and as we dug in and submitted some documents, we're basically told, look, no, this one's not eligible because when it was created, it doesn't have these elements, so you cannot donate to it. I think in terms of potential other funding sources, I think we're limited. If you want to go, and I can bring up, and hopefully it's not like too small of micro print here. This was our annual report. That we went through at the last meeting and just talked about, all the tax increment districts and where they're at. And then really, at the very far end, projecting out, future project costs and future revenue and surplus and deficit. And as you see, right, 9 sticks out on there pretty bad that it's going to end up in the hole and we think even a little bit more, again, than it was projected here. These other tax increment districts, there is some potential, for that. I think on here, and it's hard to fit all on one screen, but 7 and 8, have the best, I would say, financial position in terms of where they're at. I think if we don't amend, one of those things is we will still have to go down the path of closing 7 and 8. Because we're running out of projects, and I don't think in terms of just, again, being ethical, that it's fair to look at, putting projects in that don't necessarily, need to be done, or that weren't, part of the project plan just to do a project for the sake of doing projects. I think there would be some further discussion potentially about, okay, because there is surplus in these, are there some other TIDs that we would perhaps allocate to, maybe other blight or redevelopment ones, that we would say, look, maybe we have gone in deep on some of those, and that's where I would talk, potentially about, the shipyard TID, which we did do some borrowing up front on TID 22. Would you potentially do the allocations to that TID? Because it is going to be a few years till projects come online and, start to generate an increment there. Perhaps we would come back with a request to allocate there. I think either way, just in fairness for the other taxing jurisdictions, 7, 8, and 12, like, we want to start the process of closing down and terminating early. And I think that's just one way or another, we would like to do that. In doing so, I think our attempt here was to try and right side 9 back up. But again, just it's the city's responsibility to manage these tax increment districts. And if the Joint Review Board decides not to move forward with the amendment, it'll be up to the city to determine how we want to go forward and potentially close out that TID. And that's I think Alderdorf, Alder-Gerlach are here. We're tight as it is on our budget, and in terms of finding funds, to help close that gap. There's going to be some tough choices to do it. We can kick the can down the road, right, and wait till 2026 till we have to close it to make that decision. But I think in fairness, we should probably start to look at, how we could do that sooner than later. So, I mean, I think, our staff, Director Ellenbeck and I have tried to be, creative about how we do some of these things and put these things together. But also understand and respect the role of the JRB here and what they decide we will work with and take steps to move forward from that. I think one of the things that is, the purpose of today is to, make recommendations on each of these resolutions that are here. Ultimately, the RDA and council will make their adoption or rejection of these before coming back here to finalize it. The JRB, as we discussed last year, does not have a role in the affordable housing resolutions, but they will have a role in these allocations because they have to adopt the project plan. There is a few weeks, to think about in terms of, making that final decision. But if there's hesitation, I think it would be important for the RDA and council to know now, so they can, have that in their, discussions when this comes before those boards.
Kevin, you bonded for infrastructure then out at 9, and it was for light industrial use or an industrial park. How applicable is that infrastructure for housing projects? And how would that be used in a housing project?
Sure. Do you want to go ahead?
Sure, I can go ahead. Again, the infrastructure and the purchases were done years ago. In 2003, the city spent $1.2 million on a land purchase. Again, they bought some additional land in 2005. They spent about $350,000. And then between 2004 and 5, they spent money on sewer, water, and pavement of about $700,000. And then back in 2006 and 2007, they spent another $400,000 on stormwater management and some additional water construction. So it would be definitely for any development. You got storm, pavement, sewer, and water. And some land purchase is what was done between 2003 and 2007.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think in terms of, there wasn't any, I would say, right, things that could only be used by a industrial user. It's pretty standard public infrastructure. So in terms of the flexibility, that's an option. I think the other piece is that, look, the city bonds for public infrastructure like this all the time. In this case, it was really targeted towards future development. And I think as we talked about at the annual meeting, right, we put in some public infrastructure into TID 14 and the rail yard. And here we have the development to help support, paying back that infrastructure. And in this case, we didn't get it.
What happens to this land that was purchased? That sounds like a lot of land, and essentially, if we were to terminate the other TIDs and then those excess amounts were distributed, they would come back to our taxing jurisdictions. So is there the possibility that instead of doing this allocation to TID 9, that land could be sold to redeem part of that? Or does it go to the city if the TID is terminated?
So there's potential we could sell some of the land. I was not here at the time. I will say it's probably not land I would have recommended purchasing, and I'll leave it at that. I don't think we would get a whole lot for it. I think we could get some things for it, but it's marginal land. There's no highway access to it. In terms of a functional piece of it, it would require purchasing additional land from adjacent landowners because that's a state-controlled highway out there, and you'd have to buy the access rights through somebody else. So you can see it, but you can't really get there.
And am I right to say that it'll be city-owned land if nothing changes, if nothing happens?
Yeah, I think for sure, we've had it out there on the market in terms of development, potential. And again, if the right project came along that could generate enough increment, to do additional improvements like buying the additional land, to buy the highway access rights, it's a great piece of land to do that development. Unfortunately, we just haven't had that project that could push it that far to make it feasible. And I think, again, in the interest of being conservative with the funds that we have now, we just don't want to go any further into the debt in terms of like, okay, let's do it, hoping that something will come. I think just internally, from administrative point of view, this is, myself, finance director, public works director, we just didn't feel appropriate, spending more money to do more infrastructure when it just, the market appetite for development out there just has not been as strong for industrial users. Even though it has great, highway access and is close to things, there's still a perception problem that it's too far out to do industrial businesses. And people go look at it and then they say, well, what do you have out in, far east I-43 Business Park?
The only comment that I would add is probably the discussion was, I don't think we would shut down 7, we wouldn't have recommended to shut down 7 and 8 early if we weren't going to shut down 9.
Yeah, I would agree. I think having them all, tied together is what kind of, we called it last year kind of like the TID cleanup, and that is really to get, 7, 8, 9, 12, 17 really all closed early before their mandatory termination date, and do it in a way that really kind of left the books at 0 in terms of there's not a cash disbursement to the taxing jurisdictions. There's also then not a debt obligation for the city, but in the same way they're all before their mandatory termination date, anywhere from I think 4 to 10 years, which then just at least gets those back on an annual basis back on the tax rolls for those taxing jurisdictions.
Right, because it looks like 7 and 8 really don't mandatory accruals till 2029, and there's some pretty substantial surplus that is expected in those 2 TIDs. So, we really are giving that additional surplus increment back to the other taxing jurisdictions if we shut it down in 21 versus 29.
Yeah, I agree with that with respect to the tax increment in both 7 and 8, and getting that shut down early. It does provide revenue for the taxing jurisdictions ahead of time. Almost you're really treating it, even though they're not attached to each other, you are treating it as though it's one large TIF. What is the tax increment from number 9? You have the 182,000. What's that coming from?
There has been a little industrial development out in that area, so a few projects, and then also I believe the Aurora Bay Care facility is also generating that increment out there. So it's a tough one.
I'm really struggling with this one because it just feels like we're managing the system. And again, I appreciate that you're being upfront and honest, but it's like I feel like we have a responsibility as a JRB to manage it properly. And again, I mean, that's some of the challenge and the risk that you have. And I think we've done a great job of working together to try and find ways to make it work. It's just, even if it's 50-50 or 60-40, I could probably get myself along the path, but if it's really just a loophole, it doesn't feel like we're doing what's right. And that's just my personal opinion, and others may feel differently, but that's what I'm struggling with.
So, and I don't know if it's appropriate to, put this out on the fly. I think one of the things, as Director Ellenbecker had talked about in terms of, right, having these all tied together and trying to, absolve, potential exposure for the city for debt service. I think, JRB has been very supportive of development of our new tax increment districts. I think we've been really good when we've talked about creating them, right? Showing that most of them have been, pay as you go and are not encumbering a lot of funds out front. In terms of being able to perhaps then use, some of these allocations then in order to terminate it early, would the JRB consider changing those allocations? And we'd probably have to go through, a process again about amending, but potentially to TID 22, I'm gonna get it right, which is the shipyard. In terms of that project has required, some borrowing on the city up front. It's a piece of land. I mean, I don't have to tell you, right? 40 years vacant, and it's required some, substantial investment in terms of, environmental remediation, bringing in the fill to get it all over the floodplain, and really, design what we talked about here for two things: doing the environmental remediation, but then also housing moving forward. And so that, just in terms of, I think, the project when it was discussed and approved at council, again, had hoped to keep that off the tax levy and use tax increment to do that. As you know, we've got a term sheet with Merge Urban Development for $20-25 million project. We hope to bring back a development agreement that in the upcoming weeks. But again, it's going to be 2-3 years before the actual tax increment from that project starts moving forward. So just, I think, again, it's probably not appropriate right now to actually make a motion on, because this was not, noticed as part of the agenda, but I think that would help us in terms of the city. If we could make some other consideration that, again, I can't project everything out 26 years in the future where that would be at, but at least, for some of the borrowing that we've encumbered there. And I think, Director Ellenbecker, correct me if I'm wrong, I think we're in about 3.5-4 million of borrowing for the shipyard so far.
3.5.
Could help us, potentially delay some additional borrowing in that area to help, use cash to complete projects on some of those things. So I wanted to put that out there in terms of, potentially using that as an option. But again, we'll respect at the end of the day what the Joint Review Board decides.
Personally, I'd be more inclined to do that than the TID 9. I'm assuming that frees up dollars to cover off your risk in TID 9. You reallocate those dollars away from 22 into 9. Does that help you, or does that still leave everybody high and dry on TID 9?
It still leaves us exposed, for the debt service. I think and again, I don't want to speak for Director Ellenbecker or the council who would ultimately decide, but at least gives a little bit of runway room to anticipate that debt, coming back to the city. And maybe you don't have to take it all off in one chunk. And there's some time built in there to say, look, maybe there is a development project that comes, and perhaps it gets rolled over and encumbered into a new tax increment district. When that time comes, at least I think we would probably then, keep it open, even though it's going in the hole a little bit every year, with the hope that, all right, a new project, a new TID, and you just kind of roll over that debt service into that piece. It at least allows the city, and that's why we're talking about it now, right? 6 years out, but it's going to come fast. Could at least position ourselves, and I think, Alder Dorf can attest. Chair of the Finance Committee, putting in a CIP, if we need to put this on the radar to say, look, there's some costs we might have to eat for some development out in this area, we can at least plan for it. And it's not like, all right, I'd hate to be coming to you, right, in year 2026 being like, oh yeah, by the way, can we plug this hole? It's at least giving us a little runway room to prepare for it.
how do the others feel on the JRB? I mean, I don't, if I'm standing alone, I'm, you know, other opinions or perspectives?
Yeah, Kevin, when you went to the state and talked to them about allowing the transfer, did they say you need to put this in the project plan and you don't actually need to do it? Or did they just say you need to put it in the project plan, wink wink, or did they not give any indication at all that the requirement was just to have it in the plan?
Sure. I mean, a lot of it was communicated, you know, through email, and I think it was, look, I think as Mr. Matthews had described, like, you found a way to get this done, and if you did it, yes, we would accept it. I don't think they'd encourage saying, like, go ahead and do it and figure it out, but yes, this would be part of it that would be acceptable to them in terms of allowing and permitting that allocation.
Given that, I understand your reservations, Bob, but I don't have a problem with that part. My sticking point was the idea that the city of Green Bay is going to end up with, you know, however much land out there from this kind of, no offense to the people, it's kind of failed project. So after the end of the failed project, we've invested $2.5 million, and the city has 60 acres or whatever it is out there. And, you know, even if it is valued, you know, doesn't have any value, then it still just kind of felt weird to me that they would have essentially gained as an entity for this. That was my reservation. I don't know that it's going to affect my position on this or the county's position, but it did make me want to stop and think about it for a minute before we moved on.
Well, I had similar thoughts with respect to the gain of the property of the city and then what the city is going to do with the property. I do appreciate the comment about the city moving forward with development of TID 9, regardless of what happens. I do like the fact that housing is being discussed, and I know we've had lots of conversations about stratification of housing with income levels. I hope that continues all over Green Bay, because that's how you make a vibrant community, and I know Kevin knows that. So I'm struggling with the decision that was made in the past, and I do appreciate the movement of the city to get themselves into a better footing, and as a result of getting TIDs 7 and 8 closed early, the impact to the taxing jurisdictions is minimized. It does get the city off the hook though with the debt, and then provides them with the acreage. We want that developed. That's the reason that we have the TID.
I think given those points of view, I'm willing to make a motion to approve the amendment of the project plan for TID 9, considered under item 7.
I'll second it.
Okay, we have a motion by Bradley, second by Peter. Any other discussion on this item? Otherwise, I will take a vote. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
I'm going to say aye, and then any nays?
Nay.
Okay. That does pass, 3-1. But that's
Discussion, thank you, I appreciate it.
No, and look, I've tried, I really appreciate, you know, the frankness we've been able to have here. I think, again, I mean, the whole notion of this joint review board, you know, I think cooperatively we're trying to do things that are in the best interest of all the parties. And just what happens in the past has happened, and we're just taking what we've got and trying to do the best way to move forward. You know, ultimately, I think, again, there's going to be one more discussion on this, and I'm sure there may be just some discussion at RDA and council as well, and how this feels before it's finally finalized. All right, so with that, so there's a motion to, I guess, amend this project plan. If you want to just take up the other piece of number 9 right now, just so that we can kind of get that off the table, because, and I think that would be item.
number 8. Yep.
Yep, item number 8.
Yep, for consideration with possible action to adopt a termination resolution for the dissolution of the project plan for the closure of TID 9, State Highway 5457 Business Park.
All right. So what that does then is just, as long as we're talking about TID 9, this goes back to the, again, timetable that we would anticipate with the allocations. This is where we're at again in 2019, part of the year-end report. In 2020, we anticipate about 190,000 coming in, public expenses, the debt expenses. If the other allocations are approved, we'd have 2.7 in to give us ending balance of 1.1, which is then enough to pay off. You add the increment from next year, and then the rest of the future debt expenses. And so basically we end at 0, and this TID would be terminated in 2021. Again, we're going to go back through 7 and 8 and 12 to talk about those allocations. If all are approved, this will end again at 0. If for some reason they're not, I mean, there will still be some potential debt encumbered that will be the responsibility of the city. But with that, we are recommending, based on these plans working together, to terminate this effective April 15th of 2021.
Any other discussions, or I would take a motion?
Motion to approve termination?
Second.
All right, we have a motion on the table by Bradley, second by Peter. Any other discussion? Otherwise, I'll take a vote. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Nay. That passes. Okay, Bob. So it passes 3-1.
All right. Go back to number 1. Or we need a formal motion to pull it back off the table. Continue.
Sure, I'll take a motion to move back to the beginning of the agenda.
Motion to resume the agenda.
Second.
A motion made by Bradley. I'm sorry, was that Bob?
Yes.
And then Bob, second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Passes. We're back to number 1. Consideration with possible action to adopt the allocation amendment resolution and amend the project plan for TID 7, Ashland Avenue and Lombardi Avenue corridors.
Thank you. So as I talked through before, with that, this would allow for up to $1 million to be allocated. We anticipate we would need about $800,000 to go towards TID 9 as part of this recommended allocation amendment.
Any discussion? Otherwise, I would take a motion.
All right, so move.
I'll second.
All right, we have a motion by Peter, a second by Bob. Any other discussion? Otherwise, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, nay. That passes 4-0.
All right.
Number 2, consideration with possible action to adopt an affordable housing extension resolution for TID 7, Ashland Avenue and Lombardi Avenue corridors.
Thank you. So just go back to the slide of cash flows. With all the taxes that were due for 2019 coming in 2020, there should be enough to balance out this TID and have it even. With that, we would propose doing a affordable housing extension, which would extend the TID until April 15th of 2021. That way the taxes for tax year 2020, which would be collected in 2021, which we believe will be around $765,000. I know that backs out, there's some computer aid and other things in there, so it could be a little more, a little less, but we're anticipating about $765,000 that we would put into an affordable housing fund. The redevelopment authority and the city have discussed a particular fund in terms of, call it TIDA, Tax Increment District Affordable Housing Fund, and what they, how they would allocate those projects. That will, the RDA and Council approved a draft of that. That will be coming back to RDA and Council this fall, along with recommendations from our housing study about just exactly how those funds should be allocated. But with that, this would put $765,000 into that fund. This would still allow for a termination before its mandatory termination date of 2029. So then, basically tax year 2021 for increment then coming in 22. There'd be about $765,000 going back to the taxing jurisdiction split amongst you.
Any discussion on number 2? Otherwise, I would take a motion.
I so move. Second.
We have a motion by Peter and second by Bradley.
Yes.
All in favor, say aye.
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 Those nay. That passes 4-0. On to number 3, consideration with possible action to adopt a termination resolution for the dissolution of project plan for the closure of Tibs 7, Ashland Avenue and Lombardi Avenue corridor.
Thank you. So this is the 3 of 3 on TID 7, and basically says once the affordable housing increment comes in, this TID will be terminated effective April 15th of 2021.
I so move. Second.
We have a motion by Peter, second by Bradley. Any discussion? Not all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Nay? Okay, that passes 4-0. Move on to number 4, consideration with possible action to adopt an allocation amendment resolution and amend the project plan for TID 8, Henry and Morrow Streets.
Thank you. So we have another set of 3, which talks about doing an allocation. Here it will be to primarily TID 9, but also TID 17, to do an allocation for that. TID 8 is on the near east side of the city. Was used to finance some housing projects out in that area. Just some updated cash flows. 2019, we ended the year with just under $2 million in the fund. With that, we would expect another $340,000 of increment this year. Some small expenses just for the admin fees and allocation to staff to maintain this tax increment district. We would encumber then potentially all the future debt that is outstanding on here, and then look at an allocation amendment of 1.5 million. I think it's split 60,000 to go to TID 17, and then the remainder to go to TID 9 to close it out. The following items then we'll talk about potentially one more year for an affordable housing extension, but then this tax increment district would be done in April of next year. So this item just specifically refers to the allocation amendment. And just to go back, this one for TID 8, there's a limit of 1.5 to go to TID 9. We anticipate almost all of that, about 1.48. To go there, and then a limit of 100,000 to go into TID 17. We anticipate about 60,000 needed to close that tax increment district down. So we are recommending the allocation. The funds would be allocated this year in order to permit terminations in April of next year.
Any other discussion on number 4?
When would TID 8 normally terminate, Kevin?
I believe it's 2029. I think it's the same as TID 7. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
Yep, so 8 years early.
I so move.
Second.
We have a motion by Peter, second by Bob. Any other discussion? Those all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, say nay. That passes 4-0. Moving on to number 5, consideration with possible action to adopt a affordable housing extension resolution for TID 8, Henry and Morrow Street.
Thank you. As you look in the cash flows, this would be the same situation as TID 7. Using all the increment from 2019 taxes this year to basically break even. And then we would take the 2020 taxes that will be collected in 2021, about $310,000 that would go into an affordable housing fund for the city. After those are collected, that would permit, again, the termination in April of next year.
Motion to approve.
Second.
We have a motion by Bradley, second by Peter. Any other discussion? All in favor, say aye.
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 Aye. Opposed, nay. That passes 4-0. Moving on to number 6, consideration with possible action to adopt a termination resolution for the dissolution of project plan for the closure of TID 8, Henry and Morrow Street.
Again, just third piece in the puzzle, allowing for after the affordable housing extension to close this down in April of 2021.
I so move.
I'll second.
We have a motion by Peter, second by Bob. Any other discussion? There is, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. That passes 4-0. Moving then on to number 9, consideration with possible action to adopt an allocation amendment resolution and amendment to the project plan for TID 12, the I-43 commercial development.
Thank you. This is TID 12, again, one of our more successful TIDs, facilitating development of the I-43 Business Center on the far east side of the city. Just some updated numbers. This is the same as 7 and 8 with the exception of this is just one more year out. As we've talked about in here, we are using some of the fund balance to complete infrastructure out in that area that was needed to facilitate existing development, primarily for the Nature's Way project, but also put the city in a good place to do a new tax increment district out here upon expansion of I-43. So a lot of that has gone into some deep sewer work, sewer extension, an interceptor to expand the capacity to develop, along with some road projects. If you've been out in that area over the last year or two, especially Erie Road, right, you've seen a lot of things going on. So with that, we feel that the 2019 numbers, we came in with 3.4 million, ended with about 2.5. We had about 2.7 million worth of expenses in the public infrastructure. We anticipate about another 2 million this year. And with that, part of what we're looking to do as we wind this down is to use some funding to allocate towards TID 9 to help with part of the closure. It puts a cap of $500,000, and here we'd be looking for $420,000 that could be allocated this year. And then next year be the final year that we would look at finishing up some projects, paying out any debt service and encumbering some funds for future development agreements. With then in 2022, affordable housing extension, which is the next item up. But for this element, we would be requesting up to $500,000 to allocate towards TID 9. Again, we anticipate we'll need about $420,000 in the actual transfer.
Just a general question. I was just noticing that the affordable housing amount tends to drop from the previous year. So like 2.58 million to 2.1 million.
Yeah.
Does like computer aid get excluded, or why does that amount go down?
Yes, yep, so I just looked at pure property taxes and took out any other aid or subsidies.
Okay, so does the city of Green Bay then get to keep the computer aid because it's not going to the TID, or where?
No, I believe that ends as soon as your TID is closed. So for reference, in 2019, personal property aid was about $31,000 and exempt computer aid was $375. So just over $400,000 were between personal property and exempt computer aids. And again, I believe they both close as soon as your TID closes, year in which it closes. When you stop getting increment, you also stop getting those aids.
Yeah, my understanding is that those cannot be applied towards the affordable housing fund. It's just strictly the property tax increment.
And I guess my question is, does that then come back to us as a taxing jurisdiction? Like when we close these, do these TIDs that existed in 2017 when the personal property aid amounts were set, do they adjust our personal property aid to add in whatever was contributed to the TID? Do you know that?
I believe at this point, I believe the state just stopped allocating it to that municipality, which means it will not go to the taxing jurisdiction. We could get some clarification on that. We haven't truly closed a TID, a large TID in a long time to know the impact of it. The ones we've closed in the past have been relatively small, but we could find that, we could ask that specific question.
Especially with the personal property amount that seems to be set based on what personal property existed at 2017. You would only know that for post-2017 closures, so that would be a limited group. If you could check on that.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, if there's no discussion, I would move to approve.
I will second.
Okay, we have a motion by Bradley, a second by Bob. Any other discussion? Not, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Nay. That passes 4-0. We'll move on to number 10, consideration with possible action to adopt affordable housing extension resolution for TID 12, I-43 commercial development.
Thank you. Again, looking at using the tax increment from tax year 2020, using that in 2021 to basically close out all outstanding expenses. That way then, keeping it open using tax year 2021 money to be collected in 2022. With that, about $2.1 million, and that would go into an affordable housing fund. With that, the TID would still close. I think this one has mandatory termination date of 26. Is that correct? I'm going to pull up my chart again. I know I should have these memorized by now.
October 26th, correct.
If there's no discussion, I'll move to approve this item also.
I'll second.
Oh, Director Ellenbecker, you're muted.
Okay, motion by Bradley, second by Peter. Any other discussion? Let me take a motion and vote. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. That one passes 4-0. Move on to number 11, consideration with possible action to adopt a termination resolution for the dissolution of a TID plan for the closure of TID 12, I-43 commercial development.
All right, thank you. Again, that's just the final step, that after the increment is collected for the affordable housing, that this TID would terminate in the April of 2022. Again, just based on timeframes, you'll likely see this again in your cycle last year, just because we have to get it in when you're about to do it. But again, I think it's important just to kind of put all these together just for good measure, that it shows how they're all related, and that the city is making a commitment to terminate this tax increment district.
Motion to approve termination.
Second.
We have a motion by Bradley, second by Bob. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, nay. That passes 4-0. Going to number 12, consideration with possible action to adopt a standard extension resolution for TID 14 North Broadway redevelopment.
Thank you. This is one that was also considered last year. This deals with TID 14, which is the rail yard. We looked at two things last year. One, we expanded the boundaries of Tax Increment District 14. That accounted for some parcels that were acquired from CN to expand the development building footprint on which some of the condos were going to be developed. We also, and that was approved, we also considered extending this tax increment district 3 years, and that was held. One of the things that we looked at here is this tax increment district and the development project went through a pretty tumultuous time a few years ago when the original, well, I guess the interim owner of On Broadway basically defaulted on the loan. The redevelopment authority ended up with it. In short, we lost 2 years of development while we were sorting through some of these things. With that, we've, I think if you've been over there, you've seen good progress in terms of the development that has happened. When we have contemplated the development agreements in there, we have, and that is for the ongoing projects. The main project to redevelop, rehab the warehouses and build the condos was the first one that got started. After that, TWG out of Indianapolis moved forward with Broadway Lofts, which is 109 units of affordable housing. That should be finishing up very shortly and be online 1/1 of 21. And estimate somewhere around a $7.5 million valuation. Even though it's a $22-25 million project, because the rents are low, the assessment is going to come out lower. But again, as we've talked about affordable housing, and I think Mr. Ross saying, right, making sure we've got housing for all incomes in our community is really important, and we feel that fills a really good gap in our housing inventory. And then we also approved a development agreement, also with TWG down on Kellogg Street, to do 225 units of market rate housing in a project called The Fort. And that will also include some retail out on Broadway and Kellogg Street. As soon as they finish up with Broadway Lofts, they will move to break ground on The Fort. And that should be under construction this year, hopefully finished up next year. That's about a $45 million project and should assess out somewhere around $25 million. In each of those, because this area has required some substantial environmental mitigation, remediation, and infrastructure, putting in the streets, the utilities, and then the stormwater, we really would like to make sure that we're able to cover the costs of that. We have, in the development agreements, the developers have requested an extension of those. Both to pay back part of the debt service, but then also as part of the PAYGO incentive. The RDA said that they would make the request to JRB to extend those 3 years. With that, we believe that although this tax increment district will likely continue to perform, and we should have sufficient funds to cover that, we are still asking for the extension in the event we do hit a recession or something slows down in that area, really to kind of make up, as I mentioned last year, to make up for the time that was lost when the redevelopment authority owned this. I guess two things. One, it was our holding costs, but then also it was off the tax rolls, I think, for 2 full years while we worked to renegotiate and get this developed again. And so that is why we are asking for the standard extension, which would push it 3 years. And I believe, I'm just looking at dates so I get those correct. Right now, it was created in 2006, scheduled to close in 2033. This request would put it out to 9/16 of 2036.
Kevin, would you mind pulling up that annual report that you have just to show what your projected
Yep.
Future cash flows are on this, or if you have it just for this?
Yes, I do. I will pull it up. So for, yes, 14, fund balance going into this year was in the red. And that is one thing we used cash to pay for a lot of the infrastructure. With that, we were going forward with our bonding this year to bond for some of that money coming in. And we've talked about this before in terms of using cash available versus bonding, to do some of these infrastructure projects. They've been meeting the requirements for increment to pay for that, which is a portion of basically we'll borrow $100,000 for every million of increment they'll create. And with that, the long-term projections right now, based on the development, future project costs, and this is the debt service on the infrastructure and part of the PAYGO is about 12.7 million. We do anticipate future revenue about 19.2. That puts us about 3.3 at a surplus. So we feel good so far, but I think this is one of the things to I guess prepare ourselves in case things do slow down, that we would have that extra time to make up for things. Again, being a brownfield site, I mean, we do find surprises from time to time when we're going through. Hopefully not encumbering too many additional extra costs in that. But we would like a consideration for that potential extension.
And we may have gone over this last year, but what's the timeline for when this would need to be done? I mean, what's the reason for considering this in 2020 instead of 2030?
Sure. One of the things we contemplated in the development agreements that the city would look at primarily for the PAYGO incentives, an additional 3 years of incentive. And so with that, we've said we would ask for that extension in order to provide 3 additional years of incentive. If not, we would be obligated to pay as if it were open 3 additional years. As part of the incentive, I guess, package deal, when they look at their financing, basically, structuring out, for some of them, all right, a 15-year borrowing, that it gave them some time, all right, here's how we stack it together. So the city would be required, if this were to close down, just to make sure enough funds were encumbered, to pay that incentive there. With that, there could be or should be enough to do that. On the flip side, I think we're looking at, again, if things slow down, that we would at least be covered to pay out that incentive for those 3 additional years. I can't speak for 2030 at this point. But I feel that we could also be in a position that, look, I mean, things are locked and we could be having a conversation in 2028 about potentially closing this down early. So it's one of those, I think, we are obligated to ask because we said we would in the development agreement. If the JRB decides not to move forward with it, this is one, I think there's a long runway in it. So I don't think Director Elbecker, correct me if I'm wrong, it doesn't send anything out of sync at this point. Just understand that it may come back in a few years at a future thing, a future JRB meeting.
Right, it's really a situation where you're potentially planning to pay out longer than a TID is open.
But then again, if we get to 2033 and we have $3.5 million, then we could set up the payment out of that amount, or we could, say, hey, we owe you $1.5 million for the next 3 years, so here's $1.5 million, and we wouldn't have to terminate it early at that point. So that's for our existing. Mm-hmm. Is this something where you think the 3 years would allow for some additional development? Are there any other projects that would be possible that an extension would help you to negotiate that because you would have extra time for the repayment?
So I would say yes. Part of that mainly would deal with some of it's for the PAYGO piece, but also part of it's for the infrastructure. As we look at borrowing, we're starting right now to push the cushion of, doing a 10-year borrowing for some of these things, right? I mean, we borrow anywhere from 10 to 20 years. But if we look at a project, in the works right now, by the time it gets started, starting to be in the ground next year, really not online until 2022, fully online 23, paying taxes in 24, then it still, could provide then at least some room for us to have that 10, 15-year borrowing option instead of like, all right, we're getting towards the end of this cycle. The master development agreement for that area really calls for, $100,000 upfront in infrastructure costs for every $1 million created. And then potentially a 50-50 split of the remaining pay-go. So once you start to get, kind of under, I'd say, 15 years, the numbers start to get a little bit tighter in terms of, these developers, especially for the pay-go piece, we ask them to front the money and borrowing on the back end. It gets a little tighter once you start to get under 15, to make it pencil out. So it's a long way of saying yes. I think that would give us some more flexibility and I guess advantage in leveraging or securing a future deal. There's still some development space available, and it would be helpful in doing that.
Do you have any specific projects? Is there? It seems pretty tight over there as these projects have come together. Is this something you would be working on to try to get even more density, or is it pretty well a nice established neighborhood with development, and so there wouldn't be as much interest?
So there are still some possibilities on two pieces. One with the northern warehouse buildings in terms of still some flexibility with the 3 floors or additional floors to develop there. And then the space, there's probably about 3-4 acres right behind that that would be a quote-unquote greenfield site available for development. So based on the footprints of some of our projects, especially for that greenfield site, you could see anywhere from $15 to $25 million worth of additional increment in that particular area.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Kevin, just to let you know that Bob had to jump off at 2 o'clock here.
Yes.
We would still have 3 out of 5 for a
Yes,
quorum.
correct. Thank you for noting that.
I'm kind of rattling around in my brain the same thing that Bradley's been asking about. It seems like that's a long time in the future that we could postpone this decision.
I guess one thing, if we get there, or our successors get there, and 2030 you guys are sitting on $5 million, but the city of Green Bay, Kevin's successor decides they don't want to terminate it because they want to build up a fund balance so that they can do a loan to another TID or something like that. Does the JRB have the authority to introduce a termination resolution, or does the city have to bring it to us? Meaning, can we go back on this decision once it's made?
From my understanding, and this is, I'll be careful because I'm speaking without an attorney, but I believe in terms of terminating, I think it is up to the city to decide when to terminate. There's a mandatory termination date, but anything that comes in terms of a premature termination, I believe is done by the city, and it's up to the city's discretion when to do that.
The other question is, does the 3-year standard extension extend the period of expenditures for the city? Do you have a longer period to incur expenses?
That I believe it does not do. I think there's still, and I'd have to double check on that, but I believe it's that does not change. It's just saying, look, we're not going to spend more money. We just need some more time to pay it back. So we can't encumber anything additional. We can't make any new agreements And so, no, because I believe that's part of it, is like the reason is to extend. It's like, no, we don't want to do more stuff. We just need to pay back what we've already done.
I think it helps your pay-go argument or offer in negotiations.
And that's the reason that I'm split a little bit on it, is I do want to give Kevin the ability to enter those agreements. But it seems like you've already entered one of those agreements where the payments extend beyond the end date. I'm tempted to make a motion. I'm just curious what Peter thinks about this, to extend this decision again, with the option that if somebody needs us to do this, to have a development project go forward, we could reconvene to pass an extension. But I don't see the reason to do it now, and I feel like we're making a decision that should be made by this group in 5 years.
Or 10.
Maybe
Yeah.
10 even, but I'm saying after all these things are done and we have an idea what the increment coming in and the payment going out, at this point, those future revenue numbers that you were showing us are based on, a lot of estimates.
Yep.
So we'll have a much better cash flow idea in 5 years when most of these things are up and running and taxes are being collected. What do you think of that, Peter?
Well, I'm inclined to feel the same way, and while I know there could be potential downturn in the economy, and it's a long time out there, if we have a downturn in the economy that goes to 2033, we'll all be digging ditches by hand instead of using tax incremental financing districts to do it.
Okay, so I'll put a motion to table this until our meeting next year, or an earlier time if necessary, as determined by the Economic Development Director.
I'll second that motion.
So at this point, we have a motion by Bradley, second by Peter, to table this at least till next year or until at an earlier date in which we would need to readdress this. Any other discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? I'm going to go nay here, but that passes 2-1. All right, moving on to number 13, consideration with possible action to adopt a termination resolution for the dissolution of Tibs plan for the closure of Tibs 17, 900 block North Broadway.
All right, our final agenda item today. This is one, again, we've discussed. This was a small tax increment district created for a specific project. The project happened, did not live up to expectations. The city spent some time last year actually in litigation to recover some of the taxes that should have been created or owed on this. We're successful in receiving a settlement that to provide some additional funds for this. However, we'll need to keep doing that in order to getting those extra funds coming in, and just the cost of litigation versus the cost of recovery versus the administrative cost of keeping this open and talking about this all the time. Nothing more is going to happen in terms of development or increment. And so with that, we would like to use $60,000. This was allocated from TID 8. Basically to come in to the fund this year, and so that this TID could be terminated in April of 2021. And with that, that $60,000, or just shy of that, should basically put us even and have this TID closed down.
All right, so move.
Second.
We have a motion on the floor by Peter, second by Bradley to approve. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, nay. That passed 3-0. Next item is informational. If you want to consider, looks like a next date.
Correct. So today's GRB meeting, Tuesday the 18th, There will be, your recommendations will be going to the Redevelopment Authority next Tuesday. They're having a special meeting and having the public hearing on all of these proposed amendments. With that, then, there's mandatory 15 days before it can go to City Council. So we'll go to Green Bay's Common Council on the 15th. I think we just need a day of breathing room. So as soon as the 17th, this group could reconvene again, the week of the 21st or the 28th or 29th. Just we have to have the final resolutions adopted by JRB by the end of September. And so if there's any times, again, we can reach out to see what might work, but if there's a week that you're going to be gone or just like a week or date can't work, you let us know right now and we just make sure not to schedule that.
I will be out of town on the 17th, 18th.
Okay.
If that's a sticking point, obviously someone else could be a delegate for me, but.
No, I think that would be appropriate just to meet the week of the 21st. After the meeting is passed, it would allow some time based on what council decides to post the notice, have 5 days. So, yeah, we'll reach out with some dates for that potential final meeting.
Yeah, I like the week of the 21st as well. That would work well. We'll make it work.
All right. I'm going to just indulge myself for a moment. I just wanted to say thank you to everyone. This has been a really great group with which to work. This is my last week at the city. I am done on Friday. So I told Diana I would go through and at least get this meeting done and the process started. Again, I think there's been some really great discussions at this group, and these things are never easy. I do feel I really appreciate the other taxing jurisdictions, their representatives, really trying to work through a lot of these issues together. These are complicated things with rules changing all the time, but at the end of the day, we're all trying to create a great community and really tax base for all of us to do the things that we need to do. So I really appreciate the frank discussion and honesty and the productiveness of this group. I will miss it, but I know we'll be in good hands with Director Allenbecker, and I've got some staff who have been kind of in the wings working on some of these things. So they'll be working through the public hearing and the Common Council meeting and your next JRB meeting. So I am off to Richmond, Virginia to be their Deputy Planning Director. So it's a big move for myself and my family. And I learned that they do not have one tax increment district there, which is very appealing. So I was like, all right, state legislation allows it. So I think I got my first challenge, my first project to work on when I get there. So again, I just wanted to say, thank you, and I'll follow up separately with Bob because I know he had to go off. But just thank you again for taking the time to go through some of these, and I wish all of you and your respective boards the best.
Thank you.
Well, Kevin, I just want to say, I haven't been around in Green Bay very long. I lived for many years in Northeast Wisconsin and always admired what was going on in Green Bay and the development that has happened over here over the last few decades. In particular, the last 5 or 6 years, I think you've been part of promoting Green Bay in a very positive way, and you're going to be missed. And Richmond, Virginia is damn lucky to have you.
Well, thank you.
I'll reiterate Peter's point. It's been a pleasure working with you, even before my current role here. So thank you very much. And Richmond's a beautiful place. I lived in D.C. for a couple of years and really like that area of the country. So that's actually where I'm going to be on the 17th and 18th.
Oh, nice.
Not Richmond, around D.C. So who's going to represent you at the next GRB meeting?
So I've been working, and they're on here now, or we're on here. Dave Buck is our principal planner, and he's done some work both the city of Oshkosh and city of Menasha. Then also Matt Buchanan in our office is learning more, about tax increment jurisdictions. So I think Dave, if you want to say hi, I think you're on the line.
Hello, everybody. I have sat through a couple of the JRBs with the city before, but we actually could meet in person. I'm probably just one of the audience members. Yeah. So I'll be working on some of this. I've worked quite a bit with Tibs, like Kevin said, in Oshkosh and Menasha. But I'm a Green Bay boy, so this is my hometown. So, but nice to meet you.
Excellent, thank you, Dave.
All right, that is all I have, so I think we can take a motion to adjourn.
And Kevin, I guess real quick, I would say that you would also, Cheryl has been unknown,
Oh, yes.
your interim at this time.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes, I know, Cheryl's along for the ride. So yeah, she'll be serving as interim director while they do a search for my position. She's a tough cookie, so you thought, had it tough with me, watch out.
Yeah, she's got a lot of experience.
Oh, yes.
So yeah, back to that point, Kevin, we want to thank you for your leadership and for all in the tax incremental districts and for all your development. So really appreciate that and keeping things so organized on the TID side. With that, I think I heard a motion from Bradley to adjourn. And Peter second? Peter does a second. All in favor?
Aye.
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 That passes. We are adjourned.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Here.
Goodbye.